At Res for Africa, we stand for Africa. We believe in its huge potential. We believe in its innate energy. We believe in its growth. And we believe that all it needs is an enabling environment for its full development. At Res for Africa, we care for Africa. That's why we believe that clean energy is the only way to go, because renewables mean more affordability. Because renewables mean more jobs. Because renewables mean more value. Because renewables mean more resilience, social justice, and health. At Res for Africa, we join for Africa, a unique blend of expertise along the whole value chain of renewables, joining forces to accelerate the transition towards a sustainable and inclusive future. At Res for Africa, we innovate for Africa. We constantly look for new, improved energy solutions to provide not just clean and powerful electricity, but also cutting-edge and reliable plants, electrical grids that guarantee quality and stability through digitalization and storage. At Res for Africa, we act for Africa. We promote dialogue between governments and private players to define conscious, long-term policies, encouraging adequate investments. We share know-how with all stakeholders to promote the full development of Africa together. We train locals on the field to share our expertise and make them owners of their energy. And we never, ever stop looking for new and win-win business models made of African DNA. We are Res for Africa. Our mission is to build a better future through better energy. In Africa, with Africa, for Africa.
A very good warm welcome to all of you participants to this webinar on Connecting the Dots, Chapter 4. I am Roberto Bigotti, the Secretary General of the Foundation. Since 2012, we do sponsor and promote the clean energy transition technologies in Africa. And these products, which we have been working already on Africa, on MENA, on Western Africa, and now on Eastern Africa, it's something so important for us because every time we go places to discuss the transition, number one is a message, raise awareness about renewable energy technologies and benefit realities, and also Africa future energy leaders need to be supported. I think this publication has been so important, not only because it makes a very fact-checking inspection of what happened, or actually what did not happen in Africa on renewable, and the numbers are very there, but also because, as usually we do, we propose also solution. So the full range of these booklets provide also suggestion. And today we're very pleased to have with us to discuss the East Africa region, which is very important for us. It's 14 countries, very important for all of us. I have not only Luca, the coordinator of the whole Access to Energy East Africa, but also Daniele, the project manager of the project. I want to thank also Tommaso and Francesca from Energy Green Power, which is our partner in the publication, and our guest, George from the Kenya Association, ESAC, James, who was in Milano last week, maybe he's still there shopping, maybe still in Milano at the training course at the Bocconi, and of course, Esther, who is our leader in terms of a youth task force. So I think we have all the components to discuss and to launch this fourth report. And I would like to have this message also brought to COP28. I'm going there next week. We're there for the week after. We're there for 8 days. And also in the early 2024, we are contributing to a series of events for the G7 energy section, which will be hosted in Italy, and definitely this booklet will be also flagging there. So thank you so much for the launch, and I give the floor now to Luca, who is the mind behind all this. Luca, the floor is yours, and thank you for your passion, which I share with you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. I'm Luca Traini. I'm the program manager for Sub-Saharan Africa Program and Access to Energy. So here today, I will be the moderator of this webinar, which I hope we will find very interesting. You know, this is a program, a product of knowledge we have been carrying out for now. It's the fourth year, as Roberto was saying just a few minutes ago. And why we think it's interesting, why it received definitely a good welcome from a lot of people. I think it's because in a time where we see a lot of discussion about what will happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years, if we will meet the goals, the SDG goals, if we will reach net zero, when, at what point in time, and whatever, which is definitely very important. But at the same time, I think as experts in this sector, as human being, more than that, it's important to know our history. And in this term, our history in terms of renewable energy in the continent, it comes what happened basically in the last 10 years, which is a sort of a proxy of our history in the renewable energy space. That's why we build this publication in these terms. So what happened in the last 10 years, which we think is very useful going ahead, planning our future and setting goals, achievable targets, and so on. That's why what happened the last 10 years. Then we will discuss about what were the main situation, the main issues, and the main challenges, and the main success, of course, as well. And then we will try to summarize, to wrap up a bit, and see what is ahead of us. We will doing so with a lot of experts and guests. And so without any further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague Daniele Guzzo. Is the program manager, the project manager for this publication. Daniele, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning to all. Thanks to my colleague Luca Traini for introducing me, and thanks to Mr. Bigotti for opening the webinar. I don't know if you can already see the presentation. Yes. Okay, please allow me to introduce myself first. My name is Daniele Guzzo. I work at Rest for Africa Foundation in the Access to Energy program. The objective of this program is to support knowledge building and the development of solutions on field to foster sustainable access to renewable energies on the African continent and the Middle East. I'm very glad to be speaking among this panel of experts today. In the time we have here together, we will try to convey key messages, and we hope also insightful findings to inform the dialogue around the potential of the renewable energy sector in East Africa. I'm honored to address you today on a topic of great significance, which is East Africa's energy and socioeconomic landscape. Our journey through this dynamic region will be guided by key insights, focusing on economic indicators, governance, energy access, and the looming impact of climate change. Next slide, please. Next. Next. Next one. Okay. So as you can see from the graphs here, just to give a brief look of a general overview of the continent, East Africa is home to a quarter of Africa's population, but it constitutes only 14% of the continent's GDP as of 2021. It is true that the GDP of this region grew significantly compared to the other regions in the last decade, but still, let's say, it is lagging behind compared to the population growth. The highest share of GDP contribution comes from only two countries. Indeed, Kenya and Ethiopia hold alone more than half of the total GDP of the region. Next slide, please. The region, anyway, is emerging as a region of great promise in the continent. However, despite a robust GDP growth rate averaging around 5% over the last decade for most of its countries, countries' economies in the area are very heterogeneous. So the 5% average, of course, it's the sum of countries, let's say, that performed very well, and others that went through very difficult situations. So it's a mix of countries which are performing very well and very fragile situations and conflict zones, which still hamper the solidity of the region's economy as a whole. Next slide, please. From this graphic, we see that regional stability and, in general, the governance of the region is a crucial factor for sustainable development. Here we take a look at the quality of governance index. This index takes into consideration 6 criteria, which are namely voice and accountability, political stability, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. These indicators reveal that East Africa lags behind the sub-Saharan African average. You can see it's the orange line versus the red line, the red and violet. Some areas, some criteria have seen deterioration over the past decade. The situation is not even comparable to the northern part of the continent. Although a couple of criteria score higher in East Africa, namely voice and accountability and political stability and absence of violence. As we explore the economic potential of the region, addressing governance challenges will become imperative. Next slide, please. Now we are going to take quickly a look at the off-grid market, which is very vibrant in the region, and we'll see it through some key numbers. Next slide, please. When we see the graphics and the trend of some of the East African countries, we see interesting elements emerge in the realm of energy access. Both urban and rural electrification have seen a commendable improvement in the last decade. Kenya stands out, as many times we'll see during this presentation, having increased its electrification from less than 40% in 2011 to almost 80% in 2021. Yet challenges still persist, particularly in countries like South Sudan. It is particularly interesting to highlight the best practices in the region. Ethiopia is one of them. They went from above 20% access, slightly above 20% access in 2011, and well below the sub-Saharan Africa average, to almost 55%, surpassing the subcontinent average of 50% in just 10 years. This is particularly important to look at, as it is foreseen that the electricity demand in the region will rise by an astonishing 250% by 2030, an increase which will be mainly driven by rapid urbanization and the demographics. Next slide. One of the most important allies in answering to these growing energy needs are the off-grid solutions. With over 60 million Africans gaining access in the last decade thanks to decentralized solutions, they could be considered as potential for a deeply transformative trend. East Africa, with Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda are leading the way on this field, and have attracted more than half of global off-grid investments in the last few years. Next slide, please. Just to give a number on the interest that the off-grid market is generating, annual commitments in Africa grew from only $500,000 to $380 million in only 10 years. East Africa attracted a cumulative amount of $820 million in the reference decade. The achievement of this result was possible also thanks to a well-developed pay-as-you-go system for the purchase of energy kits and appliances. Next slide, please. Of course, as we go on with the presentation, and as we touch all the topics that will be the deep dives during the presentation, climate change stands out as one of the biggest elements to take into consideration for the region. The reason why is that we will see it in the next slide. As we delve deeper into East Africa's economic fabric, the impact of climate change becomes evident. According to the Climate Resilient Index score, which considers various dimensions, including policies, economic status, infrastructure development, and institutions, the region is the second most exposed region to the effects of climate change in the continent, only followed by Central Africa. Next slide, please. The vulnerability, which is already very clear from the index, is heightened by the fact that approximately 30% of the total GDP is deriving from climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture and fisheries, and which employ also 60% of the population. Adapting to and mitigating the effects of climate change must be at the forefront of national and international strategic initiatives. Once again, rapid population growth will create more pressure on natural resources, possibly leading to growing food insecurity and resources deterioration if immediate actions are not taken. Next slide, please. Now we're going to take a look at a very controversial topic for the region and all the challenges that many countries of the regions are facing during the transition era, both internally in terms of countries' strategy, then externally in comparison with the global agenda for sustainable development. Next slide. Indeed, the recent discoveries of substantial oil and gas reserves in East Africa present both a promise and a challenge for the countries. The region finds itself at a crossroad between the will to harness these resources for economic growth and growing global momentum towards clean energy. The shift towards cleaner alternatives driven by stringent global development agendas poses a real risk of leaving fossil fuel dependent economies with stranded assets. As we navigate this delicate balance, strategic decisions must be made to ensure sustainable development without compromising our commitment to a greener future. Next slide. Next slide, sorry. Only 3 East African countries were on track to reach their NDC in 2022, namely Tanzania, Seychelles, and Djibouti. Let's remember that at regional level, East African countries have committed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 37% by 2030 on average. According to the African Development Bank, the region has covered a mere 11% of its annual climate finance requirements. This underlines the urgency to bridge the gap between aspirations and reality. It calls for a concentrated effort from governments, private sectors, and international partners to mobilize investments that align with the principles of sustainable development. As we explore opportunities for investment, it's imperative to consider innovative financial mechanisms, public-private partnerships, and the role of international collaborations in channeling the necessary funds towards East Africa's sustainable future. Entering the realm, let's say, of climate finance, which is a game changer in the pursuit of sustainability, it emerges as a crucial instrument, offering a lifeline to economies which are grappling with the challenges of transition. Next slide. Notably, East Africa stands to benefit from climate finance significantly. Estimates suggest that the region could receive approximately $67 billion annually between 2020 and 2050 as form of compensation for embracing a differentiated responsibility in the fight against climate change. This financial infusion, if carried out, could serve as a powerful enabler, supporting the region's economies in their transitions towards cleaner and more sustainable practices. Next slide. In conclusion, the path forward is clear but challenging. East Africa must navigate the complexity of leveraging fossil fuel resources while embracing the imperative for sustainable and resilient development. Climate finance emerges as a key player, offering a financial bridge to support the transition. It is not just an economic imperative, but a commitment in ensuring that the benefits and burdens of the energy transitions are shared equitably. In conclusion, East Africa stands at a crossroad of challenges and opportunities. By addressing governance issues, harnessing the potential of off-grid solutions, and building resilience against climate change, the region can chart a course towards sustainable and inclusive development. Thank you for your attention. I now leave the floor to Mr. George Aluru, CEO at Electricity Sector Association of Kenya.
Thank you, Daniele, and thank you for the intervention, for giving us the picture of what happened the last 10 years in East Africa. And as just you said, I would like now to give the floor to George Aluru, the CEO of ESAC. George, what is your take on this, on the East Africa market, what happened the last 10 years, and giving also some examples of what works well, what positive also experience we have, particularly in Kenya. This is definitely stands out as one of the countries that has been successful in the market.
Thank you, Luca, and Daniele also for the presentation. I believe there's been quite some changes in the last 10 years, in the sense that we've seen a lot of growth from all the countries, I would say, in different sort of metrics, and just generally like what Luca Daniele was saying, the population in Eastern Africa, if you now compare it to the entire world today, is about 5% of the world. We have something like 400 million, population of 400 million in the about 11 countries. So this map kind of shows 11 sovereign countries comprising about 5% of the world population. But still, we have challenges in terms of how much power we consume, how we consume it, where it's coming from. And again, just another statistic. On average 23 kilowatt hours, which is very, very small. If you compare globally, the average is about 3,100 kilowatt hours per capita. So which kind of shows us that we have some work to do in terms of increasing the mostly productive uses of electricity, rather than just access. So access in itself also is a challenge. We now overall we sit at about 46%. Of course, there are some countries like Kenya which have gone much further ahead, almost 80%, but we still have others like South Sudan at around 7%. So there is a lot to be overcome. But that said, there's also a lot of positive things that have happened in the last 10 years. And I'll just try to also just look at a country by country basis. Of course, starting with Kenya, you've already mentioned, Daniele, around the increase in electricity access in Kenya. I think Kenya has done a really great job to increase the access to electricity. this has of course been aided by what here in Kenya we call the last mile electricity project, where distribution lines that have been built towards load centers close to the grid, as well as a very, very high penetration of solar home systems. So solar home systems have been really big in Kenya. Again, as mentioned, using the pay-as-you-go model, riding on Kenya's strong mobile banking kind of approach towards access to finance. Other than that, Kenya as of 2013, Kenya was more or less still suffering from vagaries of drought and adverse hydrology. So Kenya deliberately towards kind of shifted towards a diversified mix of the grid, building a lot of geothermal capacity has come on board. And then after that, there's been also an increase in wind and solar. Now Kenya is sitting on the biggest single wind farm in Africa at Lake Turkana, 310 megawatts. And also we've seen more solar, more up to 4, 5 actually big solar farms built in Kenya, and big is 40 megawatts. So there has been quite some change, and actually not forgetting also the commercial and industrial segment, where we've seen a lot of consumers choosing to install their own rooftop solars. And this is a trend that will continue. I believe this is something we'll continue to see. Shifting a bit to Uganda, I think for me the most interesting thing about Uganda has been the very good quality of regulation that is coming out of Uganda. The regulator in Uganda, the Electricity Regulatory Authority, ERA, has consistently been ranked the best regulator in Africa. They've been doing a really good job. You have a market where you have last mile distributors other than the main grid distributor that are regulated properly by a centralized regulator. They've had Get Fit, which has seen a lot of mini hydro brought on board, and recently now they've been building these huge hydro dams, Isimba, which has already been commissioned, and now there's another 600 megawatt coming on board in Karuma. And you can think that around 2010, this is a country that was suffering from lack of electricity. They didn't have enough power to support the economic activities within their grid. But then over this period, we've seen a buildup of hydro, a buildup of some smaller size solar, and also smaller size mini hydros. Again, also maybe a bit on also Ethiopia. There we've seen a movement towards splitting of the utility ERCO. Now they kind of are trying to slowly liberalizing, but even in the meantime, they've still built quite some hydro capacity, which has actually enabled countries like Kenya to be able to pick a bit of that capacity for use. So the growth also in the Ethiopian grid and this majorly around hydro, but also not forgetting that there's also been quite some wind built in Ethiopia. That's Aisha, Adama, and they're also now moving towards getting more big scale solar onto the grid. They've had tenders, and this is more or less an example of what's happening in Eastern Africa. I don't want to go through all the countries, but I would say each country has kind of been evolving, growing in a way that encourages more renewables to be brought onto the grid. But we are still low in terms of access to electricity overall on average, and also the use of that electricity in a productive way, which increases the per capita consumption of electricity. And this per capita consumption of electricity is related to the quality of life. So there's a bit of effort that is required to actually increase this capacitor so that we improve the quality of life of the population within Eastern Africa. And generally, we need to continue to grow. That would mean we need to grow these economies. These economies will need more capacity to be able to deliver to the industries that we want to attract to kind of improve the lives of our people. And at the same time, while we are not as advanced in terms of level of industrial activity, the industrial activity that's happening in Eastern Africa is happening on the basis of a lot of renewable energy. So, for example, the fossil fuel use, and this is coal, gas, and HFO that is used in the production of electricity in Eastern Africa on average is about 42% of the grid. In the world, this is something like close to 80%. So we need to grow in terms of economic metrics to reach to world averages, while at the same time somehow maintaining this low or lower use of fossil fuel within the growth. And I think now these are the sort of ideas that we would need to see through, to see what needs to be done so that as we grow, we still grow on the basis of renewable electricity. The other thing that I think I would really want to mention also is on the interconnections. I know there's a panelist who will speak on this after, but there's a movement towards interconnecting all these countries. As I already mentioned, Kenya and Ethiopia already connected and already trading some power. Same will happen with Kenya and Tanzania, hopefully this year. Then you have interconnections between Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and the DRC around the Kivu dams. These interconnections will not only help us to trade power, but will also allow us to be able to balance off our resources in renewable energy, so that in theory you could do more geothermal in Kenya and be able to access Ethiopia as a market when their hydros are low, when they have a drought situation on their hydros. And converse is the same. When hydro is good in Ethiopia and maybe we have challenges in Kenya or even in Tanzania, we can be able to move power across this country. This, I think, will be really important. And in line with also with the thought of stabilizing the grids. When we have a higher penetration of mostly varying renewable sources, we will need more investment in stabilizing the grid. And I think also the intensification of the internal transmission system will also be a very important focus in Eastern Africa in the years to come. I would want to stop there. I believe my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. I think you touch on very, very relevant points, definitely highlighting the experience of different countries, from Kenya to Ethiopia, but also Uganda. That, by the way, I remember was a few years ago through a study of the World Bank, where was that highlighted that among the 39 sub-Saharan African utility, just 2 had a successful, a sustainable financial model, and Uganda was one of those. So definitely is having a good path, and definitely also acting as a best practice for the region and the continent. Also interesting, of course, the point of link between industrialization and renewables. As we know, the competitiveness of the industry very much depend also on the, of course, on the technology and whatsoever, but also on the cost of energy. So being now renewable energy a very competitive source that can give an edge also to the industrialization process where Kenya is looking at. And I think that the different resources that you also mentioned, also including geothermal, can play definitely a role. Then I think there is another space, which is definitely the procurement space, how to improve the procurement space also in terms to grow competition. So, but we see that there is a lot of things going on, and we see this is very promising for the specific countries and for the region. So I'm sure, George, we will have other opportunities to talk together, but also, of course, to keep collaborating between the foundation and the ESAC. So thank you for being with us, and yeah, thank you. So I would like now to move to the next session, where we will have our next 2 speakers that I would like to introduce: Francesca Corvaglia, Competitor Intelligence, Market Studies and Strategic Analysis at Energy Power, and then we will have Tommaso Grisi, Regulatory Affairs at Enel Green Power. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you. Now let's reflect upon some numbers regarding the electricity sector and also on investments on renewables. Next slide, please. So as actually Mr. Giorgio Arulo just mentioned, East Africa hosts around 300 million people, which is around 5% of the global population, but only accounts for 0.2% of the global electricity demand. This lack of electricity and clean cooking that is associated with the region means that biofuels and waste still represent the most important source of energy in this region and account for almost 80% of the primary energy supply in East Africa. In fact, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Sudan are among the 5 top African countries with the largest deficits in access to clean cooking, and have a high associated use of fuel wood and also charcoal production. These are primarily used for heating and cooking. The use of these biomass fuels is associated with the health problems caused by the incomplete combustion of these fuels in traditional stoves, and these particularly affect women and children, and also major environmental problems as they contribute significantly to the deforestation and to forest degradation in the continent. Next slide, please. So here we can have a closer look to the electricity sector and what happened in the last 10 years. So in total, East Africa added around 7 gigawatts of new electricity generation capacity in the last decade, almost doubling the total electricity capacity from 8.8 gigawatts in 2011 to 16.3 gigawatts in 2021. As you can see, a large part of this increase was from renewable power, but however, the region still holds only about 0.4% of the global renewable power, so a very, very small percentage. The largest capacity that happened in these 10 years were, as you see in the graph, 1.9 gigawatt hydropower plant that was built in Ethiopia in 2017, and also in 2018 the 310 Lake Turkana onshore wind plant that also Mr. Giorgio Arulo mentioned in Kenya, and also a gas power station in Tanzania. Moreover, Kenya has also been developing geothermal plants since 2020 and has now reached almost 1 gigawatt of capacity installed. We should also mention that the Grand Renaissance Dam, which is an hydroelectric project that is currently under construction in Ethiopia, once operational, will increment the region's installed capacity by other 6.5 gigawatts. So this will be a very great improvement from the starting position that we are right now. Indeed, this will be the biggest hydro plant in the whole continent. Next slide, please. So here we can have a closer look to the current situation. So as of 2021, as you can see, hydropower clearly dominates the total installed capacity, thanks to the presence of important natural resources like the Great Lakes, the Great Rift Valley, and the Nile Basin. The greater capacity, hydro capacity, is installed in Ethiopia, and together with Uganda, they rely on hydropower for about 80% of their electricity generation, so they mostly rely on hydropower, while other Eastern African countries remain heavily reliant on fossil fuels, especially on oil. Although conventional fuels and hydro are still the main sources of electricity, as you can see, some developments in other renewable sources like solar and wind are being observed in East Africa. We have some relevant wind capacity in Ethiopia and Kenya that have been developing in the last 10 years, and also solar is gradually entering the market in several countries. Next slide. So, however, as we can see here, the region has still a massive untapped renewable potential, especially for solar and wind. The region has one of the biggest potentials in the whole world, because here we have one of the highest annual solar irradiation. 2100 kilowatt-hour per meter square on average, and also very strong winds, especially in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. It is observed that solar PV zones with the highest capacity factor in the whole world are here in this region, and are, for example, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Tanzania, while Kenya has some of the highest capacity factors for wind. These equal respectively 24% for solar and 34% for wind, which are very high and very competitive with respect to the whole world. These high capacity factors, of course, is linked to lower energy costs, lower levelized energy costs, so compared to the whole world. Energy produced from solar and wind could reach over 120 terawatt-hour per year cumulatively, if the potential was fully exploited. And this is almost double the current electricity demand of the region. So developing on these two technologies could really improve the renewable energy capacity in this area. Of course, this area has also a huge hydropower potential that is gradually being exploited, as we have seen before, for example, in Ethiopia with the Great Renaissance Dam. And also the region has biomass potential due to the natural resource availability. Next slide, please. So, but what determined the very limited renewable development in these 10 years? In the next slide, we see that despite the huge potential for renewable energy in actually the whole continent, investors still have a high risk perception of the continent. And this is the reason behind the limited share of renewable investments in Africa. As we can see, in the last decade, only 2% of the investments in renewable, excluding large hydro, have been made in Africa. And only 15% of this, which is about $10.8 billion, went to East Africa across the whole 10 years. So investments clearly do not match the potential of the region, and also they are not homogeneously distributed across the countries. As we can see clearly, Kenya and Ethiopia have received the largest part of investments. Among the technologies, wind was the most attractive one, with 42% of the investments, followed by solar and geothermal technologies. In the next slide, we can see that both public and private investments have been insufficient for an adequate development of renewable energy. In particular, the renewable independent power projects that are a form of private investments that is spreading across Africa, particularly in the last 10 years, and they are becoming a relevant solution for to mobilize the private investment sector in renewable energy. However, these investments and this capacity is concentrated in only a handful of countries across the different areas in Africa. In East Africa, for example, they are concentrated in Kenya, for example, with the Lake Turkana wind project, and in Uganda, where we find many IPPs projects. However, several factors like the inadequate regulatory and institutional framework, and also the lack of clarity on the region's green growth priority, tends to limit the confidence of investors in investing in this area. As we can see better in the next slide, actually, indeed, some countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania have been able to establish a national energy strategy and also to expand their energy market towards renewables, attracting most of the foreign investments that happened in the last 10 years. On the other hand, other countries still heavily rely on fossil fuels and on biomass. And the renewable market is hence not developed and not diversified. So this presents, of course, obstacles to investors. In general, the barriers that investors perceive are a general unfavorable regulatory and institutional framework. So there are regulatory restrictions to private-based energy production, and also poor and inconsistent implementation of the reforms. Then the monopoly activity of utilities and state-owned enterprises, which is related to higher off-taker risks. Then there's a general difficult financing condition related to sovereign credit risks and in general to a weak domestic financial system. And also the lack of bankable projects. So projects have capacity limitation or also can have a shortage of skills. More on these topics will be touched by my colleague Tommaso, and I leave the floor to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. So we can move, to the next slide where we'll deal with regional integration. Next slide, please. So as it was already mentioned, this region will undergo significant changes both economically and demographically in the coming years. And this naturally will be reflected also in the electricity market. We know that the electricity demand will almost double by the end of the decade, and also the installed capacity of RES will exponentially increase by 2030 with an additional 25 gigawatts of renewable energies installed. This poses significant challenges to national markets and particularly pressure on grids. And it is in this context that regional integration can represent an important tool to address these issues. Regional integration in Eastern Africa sets ambitious targets, but still we see that it is proceeding quite slowly, or at least slower than what we need. But just to give you an example of what is a good project that needs to be addressed and reinforced is the Eastern African Power Pool that was already touched before. The Eastern Africa Power Pool is a project that is already started and aims to connect the Eastern African countries' grids amongst them, and later on to connect them with the other African power pools that are developing in the rest of the continent. This is a way to address not only grid issues, balancing demand and production, but also to foster exchanges and support economic growth. Next slide, please. In general, we can see that in Africa, in Eastern Africa, we have assisted to an overall liberalization process of the markets. It's proceeding slowly, but we see that there is the willingness of countries to move toward a more liberalized market. This has occurred in particular in the generation side, while for transmission, distribution, and retails, we still have problems. However, regulatory issues and barriers are still present at all levels, as we will see. Next slide, please. So now, having a look at the regulatory issues. Next slide. Thank you. Here we can have a look of the RISE map. The RISE map is a tool provided by the World Bank, which can help us to have a framework of how countries are moving. It is based on energy access, energy efficiency, and the penetration of renewable energies in the markets. We see that in the last 10 years, we had important steps forwards in the region, but still we have very few countries that have positive markets at the moment at the regulatory side, which are namely Uganda, as it was already said before by Luca, and Rwanda. Why is this happening? What are the main problems in the region? Namely, we can say that there are two problems. The first one is the lack of long-term planning documents available to investors, such as policy documents and targets. Targets are available here and there on different documents, but it is quite difficult to have access to coherent and consistent targets with maybe milestones presented to investors that can help to attract investments, because of course investors need to have a long-term view of their investment, and the lack of these documents represent a significant barrier. But a second point that it is very important to remind is that Eastern Africa still electricity markets are still relying heavily on state subsidies. And this does not only means that customers do not have a transparent view of the electricity cost, but it also means that utilities and governments lack of resources to invest in infrastructures and on supporting schemes for generation. Next slide, please. So here we have a view of a few selected countries, the biggest one, the most dynamic ones. And just to remind that even though regional integration is taking place in Eastern Africa, still the electricity market is very much regulated at national level. And therefore we need to have a look at single countries. In general, we see that countries have already adopted the feed-in tariffs, which is quite good, and are trying to move toward an auction system, which would be an important step forward for Eastern Africa. We had structured programs such as scaling solar for Ethiopia and Get Feed for Uganda, which could have, we can say they could have some results, but they did not launch long-term investment schemes that could attract investors. And this is also reflected in the limited routes to market, which is probably the key takeaway that I wish to underline. Investors that are present in these countries do not have many ways to do business. We have mainly the single buyer system in Eastern Africa, which significantly slow down the level of investment in the countries. We need really to open up other routes to market to foster investments in the region. Next slide, please. So to give you an overview of what are the main problems of Eastern Africa that needs to be addressed, because the region has a huge potential for renewables, as Francesca just said. Here we can see four main categories. For regional integration, I just mentioned a slower process than what we would need. For regulation, besides the lack of updated long-term documents, planning documents, there is also to underline that there is the need to reinforce and to address the issue of mismatch between generation documents and transmission planning documents, and also the problem of the enforcement of laws. What happens is that many times we have laws that are very ambitious, that set important goals and provide opportunities, but what we need is secondary legislation that implements these laws. This is missing sometimes. From tenders and PPAs, we need the launch of consistent and coherent auction systems. We need standardized documents that can allow IPPs to prepare for tenders and to get used to how the system works in these countries. And also we need to address some bankability issues, such as the currency convertibility and the take or pay measures that I will explain a little bit later. And finally, for the overall business environment, we see that there are still problems in some countries concerning political instability, as you know, and the lack of independent regulatory authorities. Next slide, please. So finally, in the study, you will see two main important countries that have represented a case study for us, which are Kenya and Ethiopia. Kenya and Ethiopia have developed a very important market. They have embarked in very important reforms. We know that both countries have feed-in tariff system, PPP bill, and they have documents, planning documents. For Kenya, we also have an important bill that was passed concerning the power private purchase agreement, and the grid code, which is very important. For Ethiopia, we have a quite credible dispute resolution mechanism and a straightforward permitting process. However, it is important also to underline the step backward that sometimes these countries make. In the case of Kenya, for instance, the PPA task force of 2021 represented a significant threat to investors because it tried to reopen the negotiation of PPA already signed, canceling the take or pay policy and trying to revise the currency in which payment should be made. So this is an important reminder that consistency is very important for investors in order to attract investment in the region. So the floor back to you, Luca. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommaso. Thank you for your intervention, and of course, thank you also to Francesca. I think you helped us a lot to understand what are the main challenges, and here you can see also how things can evolve quickly. Also, you mentioned again Uganda. We will see how things will change, as we know that some changes will happen in the next future, but also how Kenya and Ethiopia are working to increase their attractiveness for investors, and of course it's not just a highway for the success, but there are some bumps during the roads, during the way. And we see that also other countries, there is a lot of discussion. You mentioned the route to market, so the commercial industrial market. We see also Kenya very interesting getting into that space. We don't see yet the market to make concrete step towards in terms of investment and so on, but it seems like the countries is preparing to create the condition towards that direction. We'll see how things will evolve. But you also mentioned in terms of integration and also the risk for investors mentioned by Francesca earlier. So we see all those things happening at the same time as now countries are trying to address those. We should have now another intervention, and thank you again, Tommaso. We should have now the intervention of James Waogo from Eastern Africa Power Pool, but it seems like he's facing some technical issues. So I would suggest to move to the next speaker and then leaving a door open for James, if he will be able to join. Of course, we would like to hear from his side what his take on the regional integration and the creation of the regional market. But for the time being, I would like to move ahead and to introduce our next guest and speaker. So Esther Wanza is an entrepreneur and the youth representative in the International Advisory Board at Rest for Africa Foundation. Esther, here you are. So I would like to give you the floor and to open up another windows of conversation about how is important the innovation and the role of youth, not just for in terms of employment, which is definitely very important, but also for the growth of economy that also George was mentioning earlier during the webinar. Esther, the floor is yours. We can't hear you. Maybe is your mic on? Yeah. We can see you, but we can't hear you. Now, can you try again? No, we can't hear you actually.
Headphones. Can you hear me now?
Okay, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Luca, and the entire Rest for Africa NL Green Power team for organizing this webinar. Indeed, it's very essential, and also to talk about aspects of energy transformation in the East African region, and the role young people have to play in all these the process. And so as you've seen from the previous speakers, indeed the region still experiences a lot of challenges in terms of power access. That is for the the population in the region. And innovation and entrepreneurship have a role to play in all these, not only among the youth, but generally in the continent to ensure that we have increased power access in the region, and also to stabilize the grid in the region, and also to ensure that we have more people accessing this power. So for this, I'll talk about mainly on the current situation. How is the current situation in terms of youth involvement in the energy sector, and also in the region, and also in terms of what role do they have to play in ensuring that we have energy access for all in the region. And this we've seen in the past few years, young people have mainly been involved, especially in the off-grid market, where we've seen, and I know George talks about this, in productive use of energy, connecting energy in other to other sectors, that is in agriculture, developing innovations around that, and also health sector. We've seen so many young-led projects which have come up to support these areas. And I'll just give an example, like the work Renewable Energy is doing on ensuring power access, not only in the health sector, but also in the commercial and industrial sector, where there is installation, they're supporting projects around solar installation in the commercial and industrial buildings, in health sectors, off-grid sectors. Also, the agricultural sector, promoting climate smart agriculture in communities in Kenya. And this has led to huge impact in communities, not only in terms of increasing access to power, but also increasing access to health facilities, vaccines, and also ensuring efficient or stable power supply to commercial activities. And this has also had an impact on its own on economic development of the country. The other innovations, we've seen many other young people, and especially supported by the Rest for Africa from the Youth Task Force. We have the likes of Nora, who is doing a lot in the refrigeration of vaccines, ensuring that we have cooling services for health centers. We have Martin Masia from Malawi, who's more on distributing off-grid technologies, that is solar home systems to communities, enabling access to power to these communities. And yes, as much as this has been done, we have so many opportunities available for young people, and that is in terms of innovating around grid stability, being involved in power distribution, power transmission. And this is where the gap is. We need to see more technologies to ensure that we have efficient power transmission and distribution. We have more the resources we have, and most of the speakers have indicated that East Africa has a huge potential in solar, and it's only through innovation that we can be able to utilize these resources to increase power access. And young people can drive these if their potential is well utilized and well exploited, to ensure that they have the necessary skills, they have the necessary knowledge, they have the resources in terms of financing to exploit these resources to ensure that they're able to support power generation, power distribution, and power transmission. So there is huge potential opportunities, and even also around the new upcoming technologies like e-mobility, where we've seen government, and especially Kenya, is moving to the decarbonization of the transport sector through e-mobility. And how can we support young people to ensure that they are able also to develop businesses around this through the different incubation programs. And I must echo whatever the work Rest for Africa is doing, especially in supporting through training, through the microgrid academy training. I mean, a word where they're supporting young people to scale up their ideas, to develop their ideas. This has been one of the challenges, and if you see some of the projects that Rest for Africa has supported, you can see that the impact it has created, especially in the East African region. from the first challenge that we had in 2020 to the current one, and now almost the fourth challenge. Most of the projects supported in the East African region, from especially Renewable, was one of the beneficiaries of those of the challenge. The work we've been able to do in supporting energy access. So some of these opportunities provided by different organizations can really help young people to change their innovation to exploit whatever they're doing to ensure they are able to transform the sector. The other opportunity is on digital technologies, where we've seen more of the development of AI, that is IoT. How can we build the capacity of young people around this to ensure that they're able to exploit these technologies to innovate, to develop solutions to ensure energy access in the energy sector, not only in the off-grid market, but also in the grid connected or grid-related technologies. So we need more of the support for young people to see how they can exploit the available resources, the available technologies to transform the energy sector in East Africa. We've also seen the rise of carbon financing in not only in East Africa, but in the global market. So ensuring that we have young-led technologies be able to utilize or tap into these kind of financing to increase, to support them to increase investments in the energy sector in East Africa and also in Sub-Saharan Africa. So this can be an essential or a key method of financing to close the financing gap for young-led projects in East Africa, in Africa, and maybe also in the global market. So through carbon financing, to be able to close the financing gap for young-led projects. And the other challenge is, and this also has been highlighted by the previous speakers, is on regulatory environment, where we currently, especially for the developing technologies, that is e-mobility, electric cooking, we still don't have like well-developed policies around these, and this has been a challenge for not only young-led projects, but all energy-related projects in these areas in general. So it's essential for the government and the concerned stakeholders to ensure that we develop the right policies to support the projects in order to ensure the transformation of the sector. So that's all from my side, and I look forward for questions, for interactions after the next speaker. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you, Esther, for your time and for your intervention. It's very definitely useful and interesting, because the innovation part in East Africa, but not just in East Africa, is playing a big role. We know, particularly when we look at innovation, the startup market is growing very quickly. We saw the market growing 10 times between 2016 and 2021 in terms of attracted investment. So it's moving very quickly. Now we see a bit more of stabilization, but still increasing. And we see how Kenya, but in Nairobi particularly, is creating his space as a sort of hub, a regional hub, together with, we believe, South Africa in the Southern African market, with Nigeria, but definitely also together with Morocco and Egypt. Those, I would say, we can name them the big five in terms of hubs for investments and for startup and innovation. So thank you again, Esther, to bring your experience and your point of view on that, and we see how that market is evolving. And allow me to take just another extra minute on that, as to highlight what Rest for Africa Foundation also is doing, and expanding our action and intervention, where in COP 28 in 2 weeks' time, we will be presenting our next program, Raise Africa, which is a accelerator powered by Rest for Africa Foundation, where we were working with many other partners. We're working together with Enel Green Power, with EDP Renewable, we're working with CSIR and other partner in different countries, and where we want to work together with startup and innovators coming from Africa. This is coming together with other activities the foundation have been doing in the past, as Esther was mentioning, from capacity building to awards and challenges, and working together to bring innovation. So I see that James is not was not still able to join the group. Let's move ahead with trying to wrap up a bit of conclusions, still keeping a door open in case James Waogo will make it. So I will ask to go to next slide, please. Yeah, here we are. So just very quickly on a few recommendations and conclusions. So we can summarize in 4 key areas. On one side, of course, is to create an enabling environment for accelerating investments. Here comes, of course, work needed in terms of removing barriers to investments, of course, to make more efficient process from a bureaucracy point of view, from licensing to permitting to all the process. Of course, also improving the procurement in terms of transparency, and rolling out auction scheme when possible, but also where needed, of course, adopting financial fiscal incentives, and of course, as mentioned by several speakers, of course, encourage off-grid market to support, of course, electrification of rural area, without, of course, forgetting the other key space, which is access in the urban and peri-urban area, which, of course, will attract a lot of people through urbanization process ongoing. Next slide, please. Here, of course, the other topic we want to talk about, which, of course, raised from the other previous speakers, which is, of course, the regionalization. So it's very important for East Africa to accelerate this process to create a regional market, which means to make action, both domestic actions as well as regional actions. So, of course, to create the situation in terms of rules harmonization, guidelines, network codes, etc., but also to create regional plans, regional coordination, regional entities that then allow to accelerate the process of create a regional market, which, as was highlighted, is not bringing just technical advantages, but economical advantages in terms of electricity price. These, of course, come together with also strengthening the grid. We know how it's important the grid is the backbone of our system, and we have to remember that for any dollar we put on new generation, a dollar should be put on grid infrastructure, and this is, of course, key. Next slide, please. The other point we want to raise is, of course, the industrialization process, and of course the ability, the capacity to the countries to exploit their abundant, if not huge, natural resources coming from, of course, as usual, solar and wind, as we know, but also other technology, particularly present in this region as geothermal, but also more emerging technologies such as hydrogen. Of course, a particular role will be played also by storage, as we know, in order to stabilize the grid. These, of course, come together with the industrial policies and the role of renewable to also support the industrialization of other sectors. We know, as been mentioned again, the productive uses. So how renewables can also be a key ingredient, I would say, for other sectors to emerge and to get more industrialization. We know particularly in the agricultural sector, but not only that sector. Next slide, please. Last but not least, the one we just talked together with Esther, and so the impact, the social impact that the renewable energy space can have. So by allowing and supporting, stimulating innovation, stimulating the growth of startup and small and medium enterprises, which, by the way, give work to more than half of people living in generally in sub-Saharan Africa. About 70% of them work in small and medium enterprises. So we understand how is important that, and also take advantage of renewable energy market growth in terms of having new jobs, and on the other side, of course, supporting those that are working in other sectors, such as oil and gas sectors, to transition safely and remain in the market. These, of course, come together with action from governments, which will be required in terms, of course, of supporting policies and supporting continuous capacity building and training, but also, of course, in the procurement process, the possibility to include local content requirements, which can, of course, improve and accelerate market processes in certain countries. I think this is the key ingredients we want to summarize. Of course, this particular publication is focused on what happened, what are the problems, but we want to also to give you what are our take on what should happen on the way ahead, and we will keep on working on this. You will find the publication online in a few days, so please go on our website and download as soon as will be online. I would like to again thank all the speakers. I would like to thank all the persons that have been working with us, and again we'll see you soon. Thank you.